Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle here from the LA Progressive. Joined with me today is Mark Fancher. He is a frequent contributor to the LA Progressive, and also we have interviewed him several times. And Mark is always he always brings us a fresh approach to old topics, and today is no different than any other. So, Mark, welcome. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you. It's always my privilege and honor.
Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about a piece that you contributed to the LA Progressive a couple of weeks ago, maybe 10 days ago or so. And we got a little heat from that piece. And I want you to give us some insight as to what you're talking about. Why don't you give us the name of the piece and the basic concept?
Well, it's called The Folly of Foundational Black Americans. And the ultimate focus is on, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, they don't describe themselves as an organization or a movement. It's really more of a concept that is circulating and has been circulating for a significant amount of time within the Black community. And though that's the ultimate focus, I really h- hoped and continue to try to frame it as really a manifestation of something that occurs across the board and across racial lines in the United States of America. And for that reason, I begin the piece by not talking specifically about foundational Black Americans, but in a more general sense of the continuing phenomenon of people othering certain groups for purposes of trying to preserve or gain certain advantages within U.S. society.
Absolutely. So why don't you start off, you start off with your piece talking about what it means to be white in America and the privileges that are offered to those who fit into that category and how that category has changed over time.
Yeah, and even the idea of whiteness being a privilege is really the product of an effort that was made from the very beginning at the time that the country was first established. You know, I've often said that people in Europe who felt that they were oppressed, people who felt that they were limited in their exercise of their democratic and human rights, those who felt that they deserved justice and wanted to achieve it, came together and decided that what they would do is that they would come across the ocean and establish a new society, one that was based on just principles, one that was intended to be democratic. So what they did is they got on their boats, they came across the ocean, and the first thing that they did is they began a long process of territorial theft and genocide against indigenous populations. And after they stabilized their situation and they attempted to begin production, then they saw that they needed somebody else to do their work. So they enslaved people that they had kidnapped from Africa. And then they began to establish a country which, even in the provisions of the U.S. Constitution, was one that was to be the exclusive property of an elite group, primarily white men with property and wealth. And they were going to be the group that was going to hoard the lion's share of the country's resources and wealth.
So,
And
if I might interject here, when you talk about people being enslaved, one thing that we see over and over and over again when we see these great atrocities towards groups of people is first the people are denigrated in some way to justify either the enslavement or the killing or the extermination. Somehow these people just don't have what it takes to deserve to inhabit their own land or deserve to have life. These people are relegated to some hierarchical placement where it makes it quite justifiable to just take their stuff, take their land, take their property, and then move on. And at the same time, be lauded for doing something that is just so worthy of being done.
Yeah, and that's what happened in this country when they first began to take land from the indigenous peoples. You can read in a Supreme Court case called Johnson versus McIntosh, the language that was used by the Supreme Court to describe the First Nations, saying that basically for civilized Western people, for Europeans to have not done what they did to the indigenous peoples would have been for them to leave the country a vast wasteland inhabited by savages. So that was the mindset. And certainly for African people, for many years before African people were enslaved in the U.S., the slave trade itself had made necessary the portrayal of African people as pagans and savages and cannibals. So it followed that script very well. But what happened more particularly on an economic front in the United States is that with this small elite group, this oligarchy, if you want to call them that, controlling most of the wealth and the resources of the country, and leaving just a little bit for everybody else, there was a need for them in order to ensure that there was no unity among the rest of the population, to drive wedges between populations and communities that, if they came into alliance, would have the makings of a revolution or the potential for a revolution, which could result in the resources of the country being more fairly and evenly distributed. So as between white workers who were being paid pennies uh, and enslaved Africans, then what they did is that they created a notion of white privilege, which did not translate into any type of economic advantage, really, but it did provide them with the promise of upward mobility and opportunity. And so these poor white workers in the South were used as overseers on the plantation to keep the enslaved African population in line. These people were also the ones who became members of the cavalry that went out and fought wars against the indigenous peoples, doing all the dirty work for the wealthy white elite, keeping them divided. And white privilege was something that, as the years went on, was not extended to everybody who we now regard as white. There were waves of immigration of people from other European countries who came in. First, the white Anglo-Saxons were the ones who had white privilege, but then when people from Poland and from Italy and from other Eastern European countries and other places started to arrive, then they were not regarded as white at the outset. And they, along with the Irish and others, only became white as there was a need that was perceived for a greater white population. So what you've had from the beginning is this phenomenon of people who are not part of the elite group fighting over the scraps from the table and trying to make sure that their group is the one that's favored, and anybody else who competes for that is regarded as an other who's potentially trying to displace them, unless there is a perception that this other group is necessary to be part of their group in order for them to get these scraps from the table.
So
And
instead of just summarily rejecting the entire concept of this kind of hierarchy, they actually embrace it and engage in the same behavior themselves.
yes, they defeat themselves because there is a presumption with this type of behavior that this paradigm cannot be changed. That the only thing that will ever be available to us are the scraps from the table. The powerful and the rich and the wealthy will always have the power, they will always have the influence, and we are left to try and fight and scrape and scrap in order to get what little bit of this that we can. And so you see this phenomenon happening, and unfortunately, the Black community has not been immune to it. We've seen manifestations of it in a number of different ways, through the years. In certain regions of the country where there have been large Latino populations, there has been a certain tension as between Black communities and Latino communities, with each community saying about the other, they're taking our opportunities. There's room for only one minority group, and we want to be the minority group that receives whatever little bit of privilege the powerful and the elite are willing to give us. In other regions of the country, you found that type of tension as between Black communities and Asian communities, specifically Koreans and others. And in a certain period, in the early 20th century and a little bit before that, when Jewish merchants would open shops, particularly in the northeastern urban areas, there was animosity and tension between Blacks and Jews because of a perception that they're coming in here to our communities and they're trying to exploit us, et cetera, et cetera. And in Michigan, where I live, you have long-standing tensions as between Blacks and Arabs. And so you have this kind of thing playing itself out all of the time. And the reason for my concern about the foundational Black American concept and the American descendants of slaves concept, which preceded it, is that in many ways, this phenomenon is something of a cancer. It continues to metastasize. And I think that it's now spreading into the Black community itself so that it becomes sort of an internal problem, which is eating at our vital organs. From the very beginning, people of African descent in this country have recognized that we had no role in deciding who would be captured and enslaved, and no decisions whatsoever about where we would be enslaved once we got here into this hemisphere. And so those who arrived, many of them, some up to a point, some of them were directly from Africa. There were others whose ancestors had been dropped off in the Caribbean, and then they had made their way into the United States. Even in the earliest years, when everybody had been kidnapped from Africa, they had been taken from various different ethnic groups and different countries and nations, people who spoke different languages, and they were all thrown into the same ships that made the Middle Passage. And a decision was made early on that we may have been in different communities when we were in Africa, but now we're all part of the same community because we're facing the same enemy and we are dealing with the same plight. And so we have to come together. And even culturally, there has been a lot of intermingling of African traditions, Caribbean traditions, and U.S. traditions in terms of food, forms of worship, clothing, style and dress, music, all of these kinds of things. There have been cross currents of influence all the time. And this has translated into and has been part of our political movements as well. When Nat Turner staged his insurrection and when Denmark Vesey and others, one of the things that they contemplated and dreamed about was after they were victorious, somehow escaping the United States, and if not getting back to Africa, then getting to Haiti because it had been liberated. So we have never really historically thought of ourselves as being a separate, distinct group until recently. In fact, in the earliest years of the period of enslavement, those who were enslaved referred to themselves as Africans. And the evidence of that is found in surviving institutions, from the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, of which I'm a member, It got its name because the community referred to itself as African. In Boston, there is a meeting house which has been preserved called the African Meeting House. There was African Mutual Aid Society, the African Blood Brotherhood, the African this, the African that, the African this, because that's the way they thought of themselves. And the reasons why we drifted away from calling ourselves African are many and complex, much of it having to do with an effort to survive, primarily when efforts were being made to repatriate Black people to Africa. There was a fear that if we called ourselves Africans, then that would send a signal that that's what we wanted them to do, was to send us back to Africa. So it never, Africa never left our consciousness. And it was a Jamaican, Marcus Garvey, who began one of the largest global mass movements that we have known, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, who united Black people around the world into one organization, one political force. So for this concept to emerge that there is this pure lineage of people who were enslaved in the United States of America and who are really largely, if not totally, responsible for the progress that has been made by Black people in the United States and who are deserving of, of the scraps that have been set aside for people who are not part of the elite group. That becomes problematic on so many levels. The main one being that it's based upon untruths. There is no pure lineage of people who have not been impacted, even in their bloodlines, by people who are from other places. And also, the idea that only people who are part of this group, this lineage, contributed to the progress and the growth and the struggles of people in this country is disproven just very quickly by the well-known people from other places that made contributions. Stokely Carmichael, who later became known as Kwame Ture, was from Trinidad. Harry Belafonte from Jamaica. Louis Farrakhan, his parents were from the Caribbean. You talk about Shirley Chisholm. You talk about any number of people who've made important contributions, who made major sacrifices for our people. And to describe all people who are from the Caribbean and from Africa as people who are interlopers, people who are coming over here and trying to take and to somehow exploit uh, the opportunities that have been created by people whose families have been here is just untrue.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say maybe as recently as maybe 5 to 7 years ago, I was having a telephone conversation with an Black woman who was an LA Progressive reader, and she was a supporter of ADOS, which is African American
This-
Descendants of Slaves.
Mhm.
And this was a relatively new organization that I was trying to learn something about. And we were having a very a great conversation about African American history. And I mentioned to her that my grandfather, my mother's father, came to the United States in the 1920s from the island of Antigua. And she says, "Oh, you didn't tell me that before." I said, "Before what?" "Before we got into this conversation. You're not one of us." And, and I was shocked. What do you mean I'm not one of us?
Yeah,
So that was sort of new to me, and then I've heard more about ADOS and now this foundational Black American group, which is not, as you said, a formal organization. But Dick and I did receive a letter from them asking us to take down your article. We provide the LA Progressive as a platform for discourse, for discussions on a variety of topics, including racism, imperialism, racial capitalism. So we welcome any kind of civil discourse that people would prefer to engage in. If he or they want to contribute by submitting an article, or if they want to contribute by just commenting on your articles, that is fine, just as long as any contributions they make are made in a civil manner. But I'm with you. There is no pure group. I would challenge pretty much any African American to do a test of their DNA, and they will be surprised about how many different groups are represented in these DNA tests that they're doing these days.
Yeah. And you know, the thing that I guess is concerning to me, in addition to other things, it's not that they necessarily have this point of view. Everybody's entitled to have a perspective. And you know, certainly my perspective is not one that's shared by many. But what has always existed within our community and our efforts to struggle for freedom has been an unspoken respect for those who are struggling and who are making earnest and genuine efforts to achieve something. And that has involved uh, not necessarily just remaining silent about what they do, but challenging them, you know, to try and make them better, critiquing them, saying that this is, you know, this is one of the shortcomings of your approach. And that's usually been received in a positive spirit. You know, they might defend it, they might push back, they might critique the person who's making the criticism, but all of that is taking place within an atmosphere of respect. And it's almost expected that if you're going to put a point of view out there about what's best for Black people, that somebody's going to criticize you. Is that just comes with the territory. But this group, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush because I have found individuals who are not like this, but there are a significant number of them who seem to be of the opinion that to criticize them is totally out of bounds. That to say anything that is analytical or critical about their position is something that does not deserve to be published. There should be no platform for it. There should they should people who want to criticize them should be silenced. And that should send up red flags for anyone. You know, because there is a lot about them that I think needs to be analyzed and criticized. And one of the major things that I think that is problematic for them is that even if you want to go down this road, there's some certain there are flaws in the logic of it. Okay, part of this involves accepting the premise that you are a quote unquote American and that you are going to function within the American system as it exists, and that that system makes available to your community only so many opportunities, and that you're going to take advantage of those opportunities by using the process that has been put in place for gaining access to wealth, resources, and opportunities. This is a system that is based on majority rule. Okay? If you come into this process as a minority group, then you've already got two and a half strikes against you. Because if you get all of the people in your group to vote in favor of what you're advocating, you're still going to come up short, which means that you're going to also have to, if you have a prayer, you're going to have to expand you know, expand into other groups in order to get their support in order for you to carry the day. So if you come into this as a minority group, what logic is there in making your group even smaller by subjecting everybody to a purity test? Okay, so you make your group even smaller and smaller than it is. So now you've got yourself in a very, very tiny little minority group. And what you're advocating and what you're seeking is something that the vast majority of the country has told you in no uncertain terms that they do not want you to have. You know, they've told you that they don't want you to have affirmative action. They've told you that they don't want you to have DEI. They told you they don't want any kind of minority set-asides or any kind of favorable treatment whatsoever. And they darn sure have told you that they don't want you to have reparations. But the mindset of many of these of the people who subscribe to this point of view is that reparations is almost a given. Their concern is not how are we going to get reparations so much as once we get it, let's make sure that only the people who are deserving of them will have them.
I'm glad that you bring this point in because it seems to me that the idea of reparations, when it looked like on the horizon that this might be a possibility for African Americans, that's when these groups began to emerge.
Yeah. And it has never been, and I'm speaking purely from a personal point of view now. I don't think that reparations has ever been a realistic possibility for us. Not because there's anything wrong with us or wrong with our claim. You know, certainly Black people are more than deserving of reparations. But historically, reparations have been paid only when those who are receiving them have overcome their oppressors.
Mm,
And so you see that reparations were paid by Germany to those who were victims and descendants of the Nazi Holocaust. Those were paid after World War II, after Nazism had been vanquished. And so the world had lined up in favor of this type of thing, and there was really no choice but to pay them. You would not have seen people who were Jewish and who were being marched into concentration camps during Hitler's reign uh, in the way on their way to the ovens saying, well, you know, for what you're doing to me, you really need to be paying me reparations.
yeah.
Um,
So
what,
that brings to mind a book that I'm reading right now. It's called You Only Get What You're Organized to Take. And I think the book kind of the title of the book says everything. It's written by Liz Theoris and Noam Sandwise Back. It just came out, I think, this month. You only get what you're organized to take. And of course, you can't be organized if you whittle your way down to be such a tiny minority that you really don't have solidarity with anyone.
yeah. And so the logic of that escapes me. Um, the other thing that I think that's at play is that there is a certain uh, you know I don't know how to phrase it. There's an emotional component to this, which is in some ways fueled by unwarranted stereotypes. Okay, so you've long, and I've had this reaction even from people. It surprised me that I've received this reaction from some people, where they'll say things like, "Well, I can understand, you know, because I've seen people from Africa, and sometimes they just act like they're superior to the rest of us." Or, oh, I've seen these people from the Caribbean, you know, they criticize Black people in America because they think that they're lazy, that they don't work as hard as people who are coming over here. Or, you know, those kinds of things. You know, well, I've heard this about them. I've seen this about them. That it may be true that there these individuals who have said such things, who have believed such things, but that doesn't mean that all of them believe such things or act that way. And to for something as serious as liberation struggle to make decisions based on stereotypes is just a terrible error.
Yeah.
I mean, are you going to, in the process of eliminating all of these people from the Caribbean and Africa, also going to eliminate the people who have contributed so much from these places? Now, Harry Belafonte, without any fanfare at all, without anybody ever even knowing he did this until after the King family had long since developed, stepped in after Dr. King was assassinated and financially supported the King family for years, paid for the college educations of Dr. King's children because Dr. King, being the selfless person that he was, had given all of his money to the movement and basically died a pauper. But Belafonte did that. You know, how many hateful mobs did Stokely Carmichael face? You know, I mean, how much, you know, abuse And how many epithets did Shirley Chisholm have to deal with when she stepped up and said that she was going to run for president? I mean, so people have sacrificed, and if you're just going to sweep away all of them, you're going to sweep away some people who really have made major contributions to our struggle. I mean, people have different views about Louis Farrakhan, but a lot of he brought together more than 1 million people uh, back in 1995. Uh, the vast majority of them people who might fit the definition of foundational Black Americans, and has provided leadership and has provided opportunities for any number of them who have ended up in prison. I mean, you want to get rid of all of that, the very rich legacy and the rich history of people who have considered themselves part of our community and who have sacrificed for it and made major contributions, you know, we can do better.
So, one of the greatest tools of those who intend to stay in power and run this oligarchy or this plutocracy, one of their greatest tools is that we divide ourselves. We fight amongst ourselves. We can't seem to find solidarity. And I think that this piece really speaks to this circular firing squad that we frequently see, especially in left leaning, on the left leaning side, in progressive organizations. In order for us to find solidarity, we really need to name who is it that is keeping us apart. And it certainly isn't any of those stereotypes that you just claimed, Mark. It's really a type of hierarchy that says certain individuals, certain groups are less deserving than others, and basically because of their DNA.
Yeah. And the thing is that I don't deny that people have had negative encounters with people from other countries or that they've heard negative things said from them. But the more productive and positive response to that is to help educate these people about the realities of who they are and who we are.
Yeah.
Some years ago, my wife and I visited Ghana, and when we were there, there were several young men who, were in regular conversations with us, and their biggest dream was to come to the United States and to earn a certain amount of money, and then come back to Ghana and to strut around as big shots. And so, I tried to explain to them. I said, look, you're going to come. If you manage to get a visa and you come, you're gonna work, but if you can find a job, I mean, it's not like jobs were just plentiful back then. I said, but whatever job you get, it's probably not going to necessarily pay a lot. And the response was, well, I'll work 5 jobs. I said, okay, you work 5 jobs. And then you're going to have to pay for a place to live. I will live in the worst places. Okay, you're going to live in the worst places, but then you're going to have to pay taxes and they're going to take some of it away. Oh, well, they can take it because I'm going to make so much money that it won't make a difference. I said, okay. And then that conversation ended with, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to preserve the opportunities for you and for yours. You don't want us to come over there and take part in it. I said, no, I'm just trying to help you understand what you're walking into. Now, fast forward a few years, and I get a phone call from one of them who says, Mark, he says, I'm in Philadelphia. I managed to get through the lottery, I managed to get a visa. When can I see you? And I said, well, coincidentally, I'm visiting Philadelphia in the next 3 weeks. Let's make plans. So I rendezvoused with him at the foot of the Rocky Steps, the art museum, where in the movie
Yes.
Rocky runs
Yes,
up.
I do know. Uh-huh.
So I park at the bottom of him. He comes running down the stairs and he jumps in the car and we embrace and all of that. And so I say, so how are things going? He says, it is very hard. I said, I said, I said, well, things are, he says, I'm making a lot of money. And I said, good. He says, but Mark, as soon as I make it, they take it all back. And I said, I told you. We could that I mean that's an amusing story, but if we had left it with me saying, "Oh, he doesn't believe me," and he left thinking that I'm trying to keep him out of the country and all of that kind of thing, we never would have cooperated. We would have never collaborated or found common ground. We just need to talk to each other and
Yeah,
educate each other
that's right.
and disabuse each other, because what we refuse to acknowledge is that many of the negative things that we think about each other are not of our making. If you look at the kind of things that they pump into Africa about Black people in the United States, I wouldn't want to come over here and associate with people who are gangbangers and thugs and young women who are nothing, doing nothing but shaking their money makers and doing all, and people slinging guns and sitting around and acting like idiots. I mean, why would I think very well or think very highly of a population like that?
Yeah, yeah,
And if you look at what we hear about people in Africa, the only thing that we get are pictures of, people who are starving, people who are disease-ridden, people who are engaged in all kinds of internets and wars and uh, different types of massacres and crime and that kind of thing. Why would anybody want to go to Africa? You go to Africa though, you see how beautiful everything is. How intelligent people are, how advanced they are beyond where we are many times, and vice versa. So it's not an accident. They want us to be divided. And the way that we combat that is by ignoring the propaganda.
that's right. That's right. Well, I thank you, Mark, again for contributing your well-researched and your well-written pieces. I think there are going to be a lot of people that listen to the LA Progressive or that read the LA Progressive that are going to be surprised to find out about this organization and this inter or intra-racial division that is going on and actually growing within the Black community.
And
Thanks
and
again for joining. Oh, go ahead. Yes,
I was just going to say that, while the focus of it has been the Black community, I think it has implications for the broader community. We're unfortunately in a period when too many of us are turning on each other and against each other, and othering people. We all need to break down those walls of division, across racial lines and otherwise, and recognize our shared humanity, and recognize the game, the con that's been played against all of us in terms of just a few having everything and making us fight over the scraps from the table. Let's knock the legs off the table.
absolutely. Well, I think that that's a good point for us to close on, Mark. And we're looking forward to hearing more from you in the very near future. Mark Fancher, thanks again for joining me.
No, thank you.
Have a great one.
Okay.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.